girlfriend and I went camping in the woods recently. We live in a country area next to some woods, and I thought it would be fun to go camping in them. We hiked from my house into the woods and ended up finding a nice area to camp in. We were only 10 minutes from my house, so it wasn't that extreme. We pitched our tent and started scavenging for firewood. We met back up at the campsite with enough firewood to last us for the night. I started shedding my stick with my knife to make tinder, and we got the fire going in about 5 minutes. When it began to get dark, we started to cook some hot dogs over the fire. The sun was setting fast, and the cool night breeze began to drift through the woods. Our fire flickered as we relaxed and stared at the sky together. The bright stars illuminated against the dark sky, and the moon glowed brightly. It was amazing. My girlfriend eventually drifted off to sleep while laying on my chest. It was getting late, but I didn't want to move her. She looked so beautiful and so peaceful. That's when I began to hear a noise coming from deep within the woods. It sounded like voices singing or chanting. I woke my girlfriend up and asked her if she heard the noises too. She groggily asked why I woke her up, and I repeated my question. She was quiet, and then looked at the area that I had heard it from, and said she heard the chanting as well. Both curious, we slowly got up and began making our way through the woods towards the noise. It became louder and louder as we got closer. It sounded like low chanting. We began to see an orange light just ahead of us. Shadows flickered and danced off the trees. We got close enough to see torches posted in the ground. There was a group of hooded figures surrounding what appeared to be an altar. And on this altar was a woman who was strapped down to it. Then a hooded figure with a knife approached the altar and began to cut her. He gathered her blood in cups. We watched in horror as the hooded figure made his way around the circle, handing a cup to each member. He made his way back to her and then took her life. She screamed as her soul left her body. The man backed away swiftly. A white ghost-like apparition floated a foot above her body. Suddenly, multiple spider-looking arms shot up from the ground around the altar. I covered my girlfriend's mouth as we watched. The arms attached itself to the apparition and slowly descended back into the ground. We began to slowly back away when I stepped on a twig. One of the hooded figures closest to us spun around to look. We stayed low in hopes that he would not see us. One of the other members called to him in a deep voice, and he directed his attention away from us. We sprinted our way back to the campsite and started packing up as fast as possible. After everything was packed, we hurried back to my house, which was only 10 minutes away. But since we ran, we made it back in 5. We locked every door in my house and stared out the windows, wondering if the hooded figures had followed us. Our hearts were racing. Just then, we saw an orange light from within the woods, coming closer and closer. Peering out of the blinds, we saw the group of hooded figures emerge out from the woods, holding their torches. Their faces were covered. They walked in a straight line out of the woods and onto the gravel road near my house. They blew out the torches and walked down the road until they were no longer in sight. We were too scared to say anything until the police reported a missing woman. It was all over our town's news, and that's when we called in to make a report. They ended up finding the body after we reported it, but the group of hooded figures was never caught. We haven't been in the woods since, and we are getting ready to move out of the state. What went from a fun day of camping to a night full of terror will forever remain in the back of our minds. My name is Daniel. Me and my 5 friends decided to go camping in the northern woods. It was about a 4-hour road trip from where we lived to get to our favorite camping spot. We planned to spend about half a week out there, so we packed plenty of supplies. Once we parked our car, it was about a half-hour hike to the actual camping site. By the time we put down all of our supplies, it was 2 in the afternoon. We began to pitch our tents in a circle surrounding the fire pit. After we finally got everything settled and put up, it was 5:30 p.m. And since it was early October, the sun had already began to set. We sat on our chairs surrounding the fire pit and cracked open a few beers. We made a fire and placed the metal camping grill above it to start making our dinner. By the time we ate our hamburgers and hot dogs, it was 6:30 and the sun had nearly set. But with the thick trees surrounding us, we were already in darkness. The shadows danced around us as the fire illuminated our spot. We finished up our dinner and got out the materials to make s'mores. We started to toast the marshmallows over the fire and began telling creepy campfire stories. Yes, it sounds like a typical camping trip, but that's because it was, up until this point. We were having fun, trying to scare each other, and thought that our stories were more funny than scary because of all the beers. By the time 9 p.m. rolled around, that's when our trip turned into a nightmare. The night was silent, and I was putting more wood into the fire. That's when I heard something. Just past our clearing, we could hear branches in the trees rustling. Not rustling like a bird flying off a branch, or a squirrel climbing on the bark. No, this rustling sounded larger, much larger. The tree branches continued to snap and break, as if whatever was making the noise was circling our campsite. My friends and I stared in drunken horror at the dark woods around us. We thought the same thing. that isn't a squirrel making that noise. We moved slowly to our tents. We all gathered into the largest tent and discussed quietly what could be out there making that noise. As we discussed, the sounds of the breaking branches stopped. But this time, we heard something different. The leaves outside our tent began to crunch, as though someone was walking towards us. We sat there in horror, as we wondered who or what could possibly be outside our tent. Then, the stomping of the dead leaves stopped directly in front of our tent. Just then, there was a ripping in the tent's nylon. It seemed like a knife was cutting through the tent. And then, terrifyingly, a horrific, pale gray creature peeked its head through the slashed part of the tent. It had no eyes, and its arms and legs were bony. The creature stood 7 feet tall. Its tight skin was pressed up against its skeletal structure. Sharp black talons were attached to its fingers and feet. Then, the creature began to sniff inside our tent. We were all paralyzed with fear. It seemed as if the creature was smelling for something to eat. Since it had no eyes, it must not have been able to see us. But, accidentally, my one friend made a noise. The creature looked directly in the corner of the tent where we were huddled in, and it began to crawl towards us. Instinctively, I threw a pan through the open thrash in the part of the tent. It landed outside with a loud clang. The creature twisted its body towards the clang and quickly crawled out of the tent and went back into the woods. After about 5 minutes, we slowly exited the tent. Horrified, we dashed back in the direction of my car, leaving everything behind. After 15 minutes of sprinting, we finally made it back. We jumped in my car, and I started it up. My headlights illuminated the tree line in front of us. In the branches, just ahead, we saw the creature, crouched in the trees, staring at us with its blank eyes. I sped out onto the dirt road and never looked back. We haven't spoken of the event since, and I don't think we plan to. What I can say is this: there is definitely something malicious in the northern woods. Thank you for watching, everyone. A special thank you goes to the author of both these stories, Alex. Alex is a creative mind and knows how to scare us with his words. His Instagram is linked in the description box below. Give him a follow if you enjoy nightmares. Thank you again, everyone. And remember, stay haunted.